What Henry VIII really looked like. Beyond the myth. We think we know Henry VIII, the broad-shouldered tyrant. The man in Holbein's great mural, feet apart, fists firm, a king carved out of certainty. But here's the truth. That image was never meant to show the real Henry. It was built to hide him. Behind the mythic tyrant was a man who changed more dramatically than almost any ruler of his age, physically, politically, psychologically. His transformation mirrored the rise and ruin of his own reign. Today, we peel back the paint, the legend, the propaganda, and meet the three Henrys history forgot: the radiant prince, the manufactured icon, and the wounded ruler who lived behind the mask. The young Adonis, Henry the athlete. The first Henry was a prince born into the glow of promise. When he became king at 17, the courts of Europe buzzed with reports of his beauty, charm, and physical power. Ambassadors described him as tall, broad-shouldered, radiant in color, and the handsomest potentate ever seen. They wrote of a king who moved with a kind of effortless nobility, a young man who seemed sculpted for the Renaissance stage. And the portraits of this era confirm their awe. In Lucas Hornboot's delicate miniatures, Henry appears elegant and poised, his features youthful and unshadowed by the burdens that would one day reshape them. His hair is bright, his cheeks full, his eyes clear. This is the version of Henry the world first knew, a prince of grace, intelligence, and athletic brilliance. The Metzie's circle portrait goes even further. In it, Henry looks softer, slimmer, almost gentle, an image that stands in absolute defiance of the stereotype etched into our collective imagination. Here, he is not yet the king of divorces and broken alliances. He is simply a young man, bearing the hopes of a dynasty still trying to root itself after the Wars of the Roses. And then there is the armor. Tower of London records show the measurements of Henry's early tournament gear, astonishingly narrow at the waist, athletic in proportion. These pieces of steel are some of the most honest artifacts we have. They tell a story no painter could distort. Henry VIII was once a man of speed, strength, and physical mastery. He was a king who dominated the jousting field, who excelled in hunting, dancing, tennis, music, every performance of courtly magnificence that defined early Tudor power. Yet no trace of this Henry remains in the Holbein image we now believe is definitive. The contrast is jarring. The early portraits capture a living, breathing human being, strong, vibrant, brilliantly alive. The Holbein mural captures something else entirely. And it is here, at the intersection of truth and intention, that the second Henry emerges. The one who would be reshaped not by nature, but by necessity. The one who would become more image than man. The Holbein makeover, crafting the myth. By the 1530s, Henry VIII was no longer the glittering prince Europe admired. His marriages were crumbling. His break with Rome was igniting political fury. His need to project absolute authority had never been greater. And into this tense, dangerous moment stepped Hans Holbein the Younger, a painter whose genius lay not just in what he could see, but in what he could invent. Holbein arrived at a court in chaos. Henry needed strength, certainty, invincibility. He needed an image that could silence critics and intimidate rivals. The result was the Whitehall mural, the portrait that would shape the king's legend forever. The original is lost, but the surviving copies reveal its radical innovation. The wide stance, the squared shoulders, the hands planted with uncompromising force. It was a stance no royal portrait had used before. It did not describe Henry. It declared him. And it was a declaration crafted with precision. The Windsor Castle drawing shows Holbein's process: sharp lines, strategic adjustments, a face refined to perfection. Even here, the truth shifts slightly. The jaw becomes more commanding, the gaze more impenetrable. Holbein was not documenting a king. He was manufacturing a monarch. The political purpose was unmistakable. England was navigating storms. The annulment from Catherine of Aragon, the fury of Rome, the challenge of reformers, the betrayal of courtiers. Henry required an image that made rebellion seem unthinkable. Holbein delivered a masterpiece of power, a portrait so effective that it became the official template reproduced across palaces, coins, tapestries, and foreign courts. Compare this invented Henry to the earlier works. The athletic prince is gone. In his place stands a monumental figure, too broad, too symmetrical, too controlled to be entirely real. Even the proportions defy plausibility. This is not Henry the human. It is Henry the idea. And there is a turning point, one that explains why the invention became necessary. In 1536, Henry suffered a catastrophic jousting accident. He fell heavily, his horse crashed upon him, and his leg was brutally injured. The wound never healed. Infection lingered. Pain became constant. It was after this accident that Henry's weight surged, his mobility diminished, his temper hardened. Holbein's mural, then, is more than propaganda. It is protection. A shield against vulnerability. A mask built at the moment the king's body began to betray him. The body in crisis, injury and transformation. The third Henry, the one history often mocks rather than understands, was forged in suffering. The 1536 leg wound became an open ulcer that refused to close. Contemporary accounts describe the smell, the swelling, the agony. It was the kind of injury that, untreated by modern medicine, would have reshaped any life. For a king, it reshaped an empire. Armor records tell the story with brutal clarity. Early sets fit a vigorous athlete, later ones balloon in circumference. The numbers climb dramatically, marking a body trapped in immobility. Henry could no longer joust. He could no longer dance. Even walking became a struggle. Reports from the 1540s speak of chronic pain, migraines, ulcers, insomnia. Modern historians suggest possible type 2 diabetes, not as diagnosis, but as explanation for the cascade of symptoms. His portraits from this period soften the deformities, but the truth bleeds through. The once radiant king looks swollen, exhausted, shadowed by inflammation and bitterness, and the psychological toll was immense. Chronic pain breeds fear, irritability, suspicion. As Henry's body deteriorated, so did his trust in the world around him. Executions increased, friendships shattered, wives vanished into divorce or death. The king who once inspired admiration became the king who demanded obedience. Yet even then, artists continued the work Holbein had begun. They concealed the worst of his condition. They preserved the wide stance, the commanding posture, the illusion of control. The mask remained, even as the man behind it unraveled. The man behind the mask. Reassembling Henry. When we piece these images together, a fuller Henry emerges. The radiant athlete, the sculpted icon, and the wounded ruler shaped by pain and fear. The Holbein myth persists because it is simple, powerful, unforgettable. But the real Henry is more human and more tragic. His changing face becomes the timeline of his reign, each transformation a chapter in the story of his triumph and decline. To understand him, we must look beyond the portrait that crowned his legend and see the man who lived in its shadow. Henry VIII's face is not a single truth, but a journey, from beauty to propaganda to decline. His portraits chart the rise and unraveling of a king and a kingdom, and they remind us that history is more complicated than the myths we inherit. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the real lives behind legend.